Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Dellin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Samara Centre for Democracy, a nonpartisan charitable organization that's dedicated to realizing a resilient democracy with an engaged public and responsive institutions. On behalf of the Samara Centre and Operation Black Vote, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, Politicking While Black. As we begin, I'd like to provide a land acknowledgement for the place we call Toronto or Takaronto, which is where I'm joining you from this evening. We encourage you to personally acknowledge the territory and lands that you are connecting from. The Samara Centre is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And this is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I'm grateful for this acknowledgement because it reminds me that an understanding of Indigenous laws, systems of governance, and ways of knowing are foundational to and aligned in what we now recognize as democracy in Canada. At the Samara Centre, we know that stories can inspire change, stories that draw on lived experience. This has been the foundation of our MP Exit interview project, which now consists of over 150 interviews with former members of Parliament. In a few weeks, we'll be launching Humans of the House, a new podcast based on a selection of our most recent exit interviews with former MPs. Their stories are woven together in a 6-part series that explores an MP's path to politics, why they left, and what it cost them to serve their communities. Our work has served as a key resource for many aspiring Canadian politicians. In service of that, we've partnered with Elections Canada to share 3 toolkits designed to support those who are exploring being a candidate in the next federal election. If you're interested in becoming a candidate yourself or helping others on that journey, this material is for you. Keep an eye on our chat and our post-event email for more details about the podcast and the toolkit. Over the next 90 minutes, you'll be hearing important insights about how we can evolve the culture of politics to enhance representation of Black Canadians in our democracy. Let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Erin Tolley, the Canada Research Chair in Gender, Race, and Inclusive Politics, and Associate Professor of Political Science at Carleton University in Ottawa. She'll be sharing some details about a current study of Black Canadians' experience in politics. Following her presentation, we'll turn to our panel discussion and then have a concluding message from Velma Morgan, the chair of Operation Black Vote. Over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Sabrina, and thank you to Samara for hosting us tonight for this conversation on Black Canadians in politics. Black Canadians have run for office and won at every single level of government for more than 150 years in this country. But if there's one message I hope people will take away with them tonight, it is that politics is not a neutral space. Electoral institutions were designed by and for propertied white men, and although explicit restrictions on participation have largely been removed from our laws and policy, those exclusionary origins are baked into the DNA of electoral life in Canada. When we look at political outcomes, it is clear that the playing field isn't level. Politics has become more diverse than in the past, but over Canada's history, there have been just 19 Black MPs in total, less than 1% of all members of Parliament. White men remain the norm, especially in positions with the most power and prestige, and the tenure of Black Canadians who have ascended to these upper echelons as party leaders, for example, has generally been very brief. Even when they say they're committed to diversity, political parties continue to prioritize white candidates, nominating them most often in ridings that are party strongholds and providing more party funding to them. Black Canadians remain proverbial sacrificial lambs in Canadian politics. In the media, racialized candidates receive news coverage that is qualitatively different than that of white candidates. And when you listen to the experiences of Black Canadians who have been involved in Canadian politics, most report that they experienced hostility, discrimination, and worse. So politics is not a neutral space. It is a racialized space, and the effects of that are particularly acute for Black Canadians who simultaneously face oppression in their workplaces, neighborhoods, and day-to-day lives. Black Canadians in politics are much more likely to be immigrants to this country as well. So not only is the playing field uneven, the climb is even steeper for some. Despite all of this, we know very little about Black Canadians' specific experiences in politics. There is no list of Black Canadians who have run for elected office, and almost no racially disaggregated data on measures of political equality and inclusion, despite the federal government's call for more racially disaggregated data collection. On the Library of Parliament's website, you can find information on women parliamentarians, those who have military service, even those who have died in office. But we don't collect systematic data on racial representation in politics, a gap that prevents us from identifying inequality, measuring progress, and developing tools to help elect more candidates from traditionally underrepresented groups. Over the past several months, I have been working with Velma Morgan and Operation Black Vote Canada to help remedy this problem. Our first step was just to identify Black Canadians who have run for office at any level of government in the past 2 decades. So far, we've identified more than 350. Earlier this month, we launched a survey to understand their experiences, and we will soon begin conducting in-depth interviews. If you are a Black Canadian who has run for or served in elected office in Canada and you haven't received our questionnaire, please get in touch with me. We want to hear from you, and it is difficult to find you. You can do so, contact us through our website, which is blackcanadianpolitics.ca. Our research asks questions about Black Canadians' pathways into politics, about who offered encouragement and discouragement, and about challenges that Black Canadians face. More research, you might be thinking, but hear me out. Even if all of us here know offhand what the barriers are, what the problems are, and even have ideas on how to fix them, we can't do this alone. We need buy-in from political parties, from those who put together candidate training programs, set rules for nominations and campaign fundraising, from elites who help to recruit prospective candidates, from the media who report on campaigns. To do that, we need data. This is the first time anyone has systematically collected that evidence, and we will use that evidence to advocate, to inform, and to develop tools specifically for Black Canadians who want to enter politics. So identifying and hearing from Black Canadians who have walked down this path is crucial. It is very simple. If we don't understand the experiences of Black Canadians in politics, then we don't understand Canadian politics. Today's panel is one of those efforts, and we are grateful to all of you and to Frank Baylis, Susie Hansen, and Stephen Wright for taking the time to be here. I'm particularly grateful to Denise Cieli, who has agreed to moderate this discussion. Denise is a seasoned public affairs professional who brings a deep understanding of politics, policy, media outreach, and stakeholder engagement to her work. I will turn the virtual floor over to her and look forward to hearing the conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Erin Tully, and to the conveners from Operation Black Vote Canada and the Samara Centre for Democracy. My job will be very, very simple, is to speak with our esteemed panelists, ask questions, and allow everyone who is joining us virtually to also ask questions around the experience of politicking while Black. I would begin by introducing Frank Baylis is presently the executive chairman of Baylis Medical Technologies, and from October 2015 to October 2019, he was the Liberal Member of Parliament for the federal riding of Pierrefonds-Dollard. Susie Hansen is the MLA for Halifax Needham. She is the NDP spokesperson for housing, immigration, early childhood and education, status of women, justice, and many other portfolios. And rounding out our panelists, Stephen Wright was first elected to the Peterborough City Council in 2018. And during his tenure, he served as Vice Chair for Economic Development. He was Vice Chair for the Peterborough Airport Strategic Advisory Committee and Water Commissioner for the City of Peterborough. So welcome to all our panelists, and it is such a pleasure to meet and see all of you. So there are a series of questions. Really the very first one that we wanted to ask is, people run for elected office for so many different reasons. And other than this notion of the public service, why did you decide to run for office? Why don't we start with you, Susie? Why did you decide to run for office?
Thank you for that. I decided to run, there's been many reasons, but to be honest, I was guided and supported by folks. I was already doing public service work in community and advocating and activating in many different ways. And I had a ton of support to say, Susie, you're doing this and you're getting the runaround. Why don't you sit around the table and actually kind of help make those decisions, or at least help direct those decisions? So I ran for public office because folks believed in me, and then I too believe in myself to be in this position.
You talk about the runaround. I wonder, Stephen, as a city councillor, and we're seeing here Airport Strategic Advisory Committee, Water Commissioner. How did you end up in all of those spaces? Was there runaround happening as well, or was it intentional? Why did you run for office?
No, for me, it was intentional. It was actually after the 2014 and a review of a tax bill and a conversation that I had with a city staffer at the time. And the response that I had gotten from the city staffer said, well, geez, that was rather dismissive, and didn't feel that the staffer understood the dynamics of the issue that I was bringing to the table in respect to property taxes. So I initially ran in 2014. Now I ran a short campaign and didn't win. But then again, in 2018, there was a proposal to sell the local utility in Peterborough. And, having been on the other side of the taxpayer, I had significant concerns of what it would mean for not just for myself, but for, the everyday average family that was trying to make ends meet. So I did launch a campaign and defeated an incumbent in that process. We'll tell you more about the water commissioner aspect, because that all it all came after being elected. So I worked with a mayor that I have to constantly praise and give recognition to, because she was an amazing mayor to work under, Mayor Diane Tarian. And when she came and asked me, well, where do you want to serve? And I said, I'm looking at the economic prospects within the community and don't see them changing significantly, with Peterborough being formerly a blue-collar industrial city. The job change that happened. My daughter, as a recent grad from Trent University, was 4 years out of university trying to find a job locally and just couldn't. So, Mayor Tarian then said that that's where you want to and see where you can make your contribution, and that's where you'll make your contributions.
Thank you, Stephen. So, Frank, for you, we've heard from Susie that the community work that she was already doing, and then being able to parlay that into elected office. And Stephen talked about the intentionality. For you, Frank, why did you choose to run for elected office?
So thank you, Denise. It's a good question, and it's a fundamental question. In fact, we all choose for our own internal reasons. to go into politics, like, and to go anything in any career you take on, if you're going to be a musician or a writer, or you're going to be an engineer or a lawyer, if you're truly following something, and I'm sure Susie and Stephen will talk to this, but it's something internal. You feel that you have something to contribute, and you want to contribute. I know that I want to say politicians get a bad name in that, but I can tell you the majority of politicians, you're laughing, but the majority of politicians I met, and I'm not a very partisan person, I was a liberal, but I had good friends in the Conservatives and the NDP party. I got along with Miss May, who was a Green member. I believe that most people in politics, the vast majority of them, want to contribute and do good for their community, whether it's their local community at a city level, or whether it's the province or the country. The vast majority of people I've met, and I put myself in that category, I want to contribute. I wanted to have an impact. I felt strongly about things, and I thought, let me stand up. Let me stand up and see what I can do.
Excellent. So Frank, maybe to follow up on that, let me see what I can do. What were your expectations as you were preparing to run for elected office? Were there any expectations?
Expectations in the sense of would I win or lose, or would I contribute, or
all of it, like what, the team around you, would you win or lose? Was it worth your time? A career, putting it aside in order to serve the public good?
That's a good question. So I was running in a riding that had traditionally been I'm a liberal, but I was running in a riding that traditionally liberal, but had gone in Quebec with the Orange Wave to the NDP. I had the person that was liberal before had stepped down. My expectations were to work very hard and to hold my head high if I won or lost. So, for example, on the Sunday night before the Monday vote, I was driving home. It was a miserably cold day, and I looked on my car seat, and I still had about this stack of literature, and I thought, oh man, I can't lose by 3 votes and shave in the morning. So I said, you're not going home, Frank, at 8 o'clock at night and a cold. I said, you're going to knock on doors. And I tried to get an apartment building and they were locked. I couldn't even do this. So I went to where I knew there was townhouses. I knocked on doors, and the guy opened the door and goes, wait, the vote's tomorrow. I said, yeah, I know. He goes, well, you just won my vote. And I say that because I was driven to not be ashamed of myself or worried if I lost. I said, look, if I'm going to win or lose, so to answer your question about expectations, I didn't know what to expect, but I knew what I could expect of myself. And I said, I'm going to put it all out there. I'm going to tell people straight what I think and believe. I'm not going to try and get elected for the sense of getting elected. And I know there are people that do that, but I'm going to try and be really straightforward with people. And because I was doing that, for example, I wouldn't put a button on. I wasn't known like most of us. I didn't put a button on that said liberal. And people said, you got to put a liberal button, so that when I knocked on a door, I could start a conversation before someone said, I love the liberals or I hate the liberals. I said, okay, I'm just a person here. Let's just talk a little bit before we start labeling each other. So that's what I was trying to do. And I went in there with the expectation, my major expectation was win or lose, that I respect democracy, I really do. And I just wanted to do my best.
Yeah, I picked up on something there, Frank, and I want to piggyback on that to you, Stephen. In your remarks, you talked about the first time you ran and you lost, and then the second time that you were able to take the seat on. So in thinking about what Frank has shared on the win or lose and the expectations, so once you lose, what were the expectations? And then getting ready for, to put your name forward again. What did that look like for you, Stephen?
The first time I ran in 2014, it was a short period because, the vote was in October. And I pretty much launched my campaign on the last day to register. And, it was to get out there effectively and talk to as many people as I could within such a short period of time. The expectation for me then was simply to educate others. So I wasn't, running with the expectation that I could run a campaign 30 days and be successful. But my expectation was I was going to reach as many people with the messages as I possibly could. In 2018, the expectations actually changed. Because of the impact on what I believe was a significant wedge issue and how it would have impacted the community in the long run, I said, no, you've got to get out there and you've got to make this a winnable campaign. So my campaign period turned into a full-time job. The day started at 9 a.m. and at 9 p.m. you might take a lunch break, but it became a full-time job in itself, just campaigning.
This is certainly the reality, right, of the ability to simultaneously be able to, number one, put your name on the ballot. And as Frank was saying, you know, you've got that last little stack of lit and you're like, I just got to give it one more. So for you, Susie, what did your campaign look like? You had told us at the very top that there was encouragement from community, but what did it look like once you finally said, I'm putting my name on the ballot?
Well, it was quite a whirlwind because, I mean, I don't know if anyone else on here has ever ran a campaign for the first time, which you would have. It is not what you expect it to be because you never know what you're stepping into. And my expectation obviously was to win, but I grew up in my community of Halifax, Needham, and I've lived here all my life. So I've touched different facets of my area in many different ways, in different forms of my jobs and my life, right? So my intention to start was to just speak to every person. And like Frank said, you know, party aside, whatever that looks like, my intention was to get people to vote because we traditionally have a low voter count. So I'm like, let's get people out to vote. And that would be that. So essentially, you know, it was not what I had expected when it came to campaigns, because previous to this in 2016, I ran for school board, which is a small campaign compared to a provincial election, right? And so, and even a councillorship, right? So my name was on the ballot with a councillor at the time. And I've seen all the excitement with the councillor, and then my name was like right here, and I was announced like 2 hours after the councillorship, so I had to wait, and I was sitting, so it wasn't as exciting the first time that I won a seat around a table, but I knew that that was really important. And so when I ran this time, I had to really push hard and make sure that, you know, people knew who I was in the area. And it was way harder than I had ever expected to do, but I knew that I wanted to make sure that, you know, I did my best and give everyone an opportunity to speak to me at some point.
I've got to tell you folks, the good folks at Operation Black Vote Canada and Samara Centre suggested some questions, but just even as we're unpacking, there's so much more deep diving that we would go to. So for everyone watching, I do know from Susie, Frank, and Stephen that if there are any questions that you want to pose to them, please put them in the chat function. And if we cannot get to those questions, I do know that they are available to have a conversation with you after. So with that, Susie, you said something so key around your community. You expected to win. It was harder than you expected. And we have to talk about, because this is politicking while Black, we have to talk about, did the fact that you were a Black woman from the community come into play, whether in a positive or negative way, in terms of how you were able to campaign?
So it did come to play with everything. I mean, to be honest with you, you know, a Black person walking up on the doorstep surrounded by white campaign helpers, it was quite an interesting time. In some places it was great because people know me. It was very, you know, comfortable. And then there were a lot of times when there were uncomfortable moments. And because I had done it for so long, like it was only a 30-day time frame. But after, like Stephen said, it becomes your job, right? So after like the first week of pain, I was like, okay, I'm good. I got this. And so I'm troubleshooting the trauma that my campaign people are having because they're experiencing what I'm experiencing, but I'm not, engaging in it, right? So on many occasions, I would go to a doorstep and I would never be looked in the face. I'd never be talked to directly. It would be very interesting because I would just have to be like, that's fine. No, thank you so much. And being very courteous and respectful and mindful, because a vote is a vote. And if you're not going to vote for me, that's fine. But I don't want to say that I never spoke to you. So it was really interesting on a campaign trail to have to discuss every step with other people, other folks that are with me on how I'm being treated. And they're upset. Like there are people in the back, like, I can't believe they would do that. I can't believe they wouldn't speak to you. And I'm like, it is quite all right. I'm very used to this. It is not a problem. And so, that happens regularly, but I think throughout my life, because of the experiences that I've had, I've been able to be tough about that. It isn't right, but unfortunately, those are some of the things that we as Black folks and as a new Black politician, you have to experience it and have to understand, is it worth that? Is it worth the energies that you need to, really exhaust that when you could be doing really good things otherwise, right? So yeah, it is our everyday walk.
Every day, it's the everyday walk. We don't stop being Black. We're 365 days a year. And I saw Frank and Stephen really nodding as Susie was speaking. So would just allow the two of you to have that a reflection on the question that I asked Susie right off the top.
So Frank, you were slow to the punch there. I'm gonna take the opportunity. As Susie mentioned what it was like campaigning with a predominantly white campaign team. For me in Peterborough, it was the reverse. It was campaigning in a community that's predominantly white. And, with a diversity of less than 5%. And then when you start thinking about the Black aspect of Peterborough, say the Black community itself, well, the communities are non-existent pretty much unless it was the international students at Trent and Fleming. And so, the experience was so different because when you showed up on a doorstep, there was always a surprise look as you're running for council. And before I even made the decision to run, I had a lunch meeting with a city staffer that worked in the mayor's office. And, the response to that staffer was, well, do you really think you can get any votes in Peterborough? And I think it actually spurred me to work twice as hard because it wasn't going to be an easy hill to climb, giving that sentiment. And, knocking on doors, I recall one individual opening the door and says, well, Peterborough is not ready for somebody like you. But, we laughed it off, like you said, Susie, you laugh it off, but deeply inside, you're hurt. You're hurt to think that I live in this community, I contribute to this community, I'm socially involved in this community, and you think I can do no more as far as a level of contribution. So my response to that fellow at the door was what? A good-looking Black guy with a lot of sense? And you laugh it off and you just keep knocking doors.
I'm going to piggyback on that. Yes, we're good looking. Yes, absolutely. All of us. And, in thinking about that, Frank, at the federal level, the party apparatus is really quite strong in terms of, a riding. Does it work? Does it make sense? There's extra campaign funds, volunteers. So what was your experience as you think about, going door to door and what that looked like within the context of a federal party that was likely going to win that election?
Well, it wasn't likely at the beginning, keep in mind. It was tough, but I want to touch first of all on something Stephen said. I'm going to use that line, by the way. I got good luck. But to your point, Denise, about being a party politician, like my friend Greg Fergus in Gatineau was told by liberals, I'm not gonna say all of them, but certain liberals, I don't think a person like you can run in a riding like this. Very, you know, like he ran and he won. And he won very well. And so I just say that to corroborate what you're saying, Stephen, that I've heard that and seen it, not myself personally. My mother's a colored lady. My dad is from England, white guy. And my features are not as predominant, so I didn't get as much, but I did get it. And I was lucky because I ran Pierrefonds-Dollard. It's a very ethnic riding. And I would say that my ethnicity and the fact that my mother was an immigrant, a lot of my aunts and uncles lived in the area of the riding. They're immigrants and of different shades of the color and some stood out one that. And I was attacked. Sometimes, people write the N-word on your poster, or they would confuse me even as being Jewish and you put swastikas, whatever. But I never let that stop me. Not for an instant. I never let it bother me. I always thought that, and I still think that people that are racist like that are ignorant, and I use that in the clinical sense that they don't know what they're talking about. They're just ignorant, and so it's never ever bothered me. I've never thought when someone says something to me and have like the posters defaced or whatever, just take it down, change it. We're not bending at all, and I think that because I had that, and because unlike you, Stephen, I was in a very diverse riding, I could really connect with people if they were Sikhs or Filipinos or Muslims, and all of them have been attacked in their own way. And I could understand that, and I think it actually helped me more than it hurt me in the sense. But I was lucky because of the diversity of the area that I was in, allowed my own personal history, the history of my mother and my family and all that, to really connect with the people. And that actually, so I'm parts of being positive and negative. It was far from me something I'm proud of. I'm going to use Stephen's line.
A very good looking Black politician.
I'm stealing that line, but
Yeah.
In that bigger sense, I'm very proud of who I am. I'm proud of my heritage, and I never let anybody step down on me. No way.
So Frank, what you've actually talked about and brought to the fore is this idea of, so of course there's the door-to-door, so we talk about the face-to-face interactions, but so much of political campaigning happens in the digital space. Your social media presence, Twitter, Facebook, Insta, why am I even saying the names? Because no, I'm not promoting them, I'm just saying they exist, right? Public figures like the three of you have to have some sort of a digital presence so that those doors that you didn't knock on, they know to go and see you videos. Now, Frank, when you talk about the diverse writing of Pierrefonds-Dollard, and that there was different experiences because of the diversity, we've seen something very different in the online spaces. And I think all of us, and I will use the collective, all of us have seen the deterioration of discourse in digital spaces, especially directed to elected officials, people seeking office. And the Samara Centre there's an ongoing research project called SAMBOT, which is actually tracking the amount, the number, and the level of toxic tweets directed to public figures. And this stunned me. I'm reading it here. Out of 2.5 million tweets, and this was just in 1 year, in the last federal election, to be specific, over 200,000 tweets contained identity attacks. It was the color of the skin. It was the religion. It was not your policy, your position. So I want us to talk about that a little bit in terms of the digital presence that the three of you had. Like,
So
I don't even know where to start here.
I'm gonna
I'll just let the
I'm gonna touch on
conversation
that,
flow.
and I know exactly what you're driving, and I'll tell you two things there, okay? First thing is, out of those 200,000, whatever, I'm willing to bet 99.99% of them had a name like some idiotic, like Fred for Canada, or I'm the white guy, or they would never put their real name. Now think about that. You really believe in something? Why are you afraid to put your name? What, like, I'm standing up, I'm Frank Baylis. I'm not pretending to be somebody else. I'm Frank Baylis. All those attacks, almost inevitably, the coward behind them can't say their name. If you believe in these things and you're so right about it, why can't you just say your name? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, for me, again, I never let it bother me. I had my team. You're not getting free publicity, you and your 55 followers. And you look at this, a lot of them, I'm telling you, 23 followers, 55 followers, you're not getting free publicity off me. I'm not responding. And I didn't know this, but there's a way my team could say that they don't delete it, but only that clown sees it and nobody else sees it. So I don't know how they do that, but like, he thinks it's still up there on the Facebook or whatever, but no one else sees it. And I'm saying, you're not getting any traction on my dime. So those were the two things I want to say on that, how I handle it and what I think about those people that do that.
So Susie, I saw you nodding because I felt like that maybe you had a similar experience in terms of saying, yeah, this is really not, I'm going to get out of the way and
well, I didn't really have a similar experience, but I do have a number of folks that, were concerned about me, being attacked in some way on social media, because I have 3 that I use regularly. Well, 2 that I use regularly and 1 that's kind of sort of, but I'm like Frank, I don't engage, I don't respond, because it's just not worth my energy. And at the end of the day, I'm super positive. I have a friend, I'm not tech savvy at all. So I have a friend that's like, oh yeah, same exact thing. Oh, we can just, block them in a way that they think they're there and they're not. And I'm like, that's fine. Because for me, I have children I got to take care of. I got other things going on. I got community things to take. I don't have the energy to, to exhaust on that. And it's not worth it. And I think, like Frank said, if you were really about, standing up for something and really, representing that, your name wouldn't be anonymous, or your name wouldn't be whatever that is, because we are public figures. We can't hide that. So at the end of the day, if you're going to respond to things like that, stand up about it and respond to it as a person and not as an anonymous person.
Steve, any reflections on that?
I think the social media space has become so toxic that, Susie, you're bang on when you said don't engage. In the last election last year, I ran for mayor of Peterborough. And, between the toxicity on social media and some of the blatant endorsed one-sided journalistic articles that supported another candidate, it almost seemed like there was some dog whistling. I had campaign signs, and I think I was probably the only candidate that had campaign signs picked up and thrown in the Otonabee River. When I walked into City Hall, and one of the staffers showed me the story on Reddit. Again, you do that thing where you don't let it bother you to that extent, and then you look at all of these negative comments. And again, from people who would never get into a room with you and have an engaging conversation at all. I had one fellow, I guess he called himself Savage Sean. Last night, I attended the council meeting and gave a delegation on diversity and inclusion. And immediately, this fellow decided to troll me on social media, not on my own social media account, but on our local media, the Peterborough Examiner's account. The comments like, people like you don't need to be in the city. We don't need people like you. Why don't you get lost? And there's a lot of it. So, because you have to keep some level of engagement with the community, you have to be able to let them know what work you're doing somehow. So, like Susie, I tend to just post it and leave it. Because if you ever want to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the ceiling and losing a lot of sleep, just read the stuff that they post on social media. So we stay off it, send the message out, and then get off.
The three of you have really shared just sort of the coping, and what I heard was don't engage, don't respond, because ultimately at the anonymity of this person, it's the ignorance doesn't make sense. The question I want to like dig just a little bit deeper. Where do you draw the line as public figures? Where do you say, you know what, that's enough, and we will not stand for it because I'm representing not just my constituents, but also people who look like me, when people are saying people who look like you ought not to be in this office? So where do you draw the line? At which point do you say, yeah, I'm going to take this nuclear, as it were?
Denise, on the coping, I want to really underline something here. As a member of parliament, you're out there, you're seeing a lot in that. I had a number of rules, not a number, but a certain rules for myself and my staff. The first thing was, to me and to my staff, you don't need to take any abuse. Okay, people can be upset, people can be really mad, but there's a line, and we all know the line. And if the line is crossed, so if they write a letter, and I get a lot of letters, and it crosses that line, don't even show it to me, put in a shredder. It's done, done. And you don't take any abuse. I'm not taking it, and I'm not letting anybody, and if anybody calls you up and crosses a line, you talking to my staff and is abusing you, you hang up the phone, that's it. If they're mad, and people have a right to be mad, if they're really concerned or really upset about something, and they can express that, but not crossing the line, you listen to them. And I really held that, so I didn't struggle with it at all. I put a line there, and if you cross the line, you're the jerk, not me. And I have no question in my mind about it. If you can't express a concern you have without getting racist or bigotry and all that, and I think all public figures should take that position. And then when I did have people that were very upset, but they didn't cross the line, I always said to my staff, if it was a letter or an email, I said, print it out or give me a copy. And I went and knocked on their door. And I have a staff, I said, find out where they live. I went and knocked on their door. And they were always like, you got my letter? I go, sure, I got it right here. And they go, well, and inevitably they all said, well, I was a little upset when I wrote that. And I said, yeah, it's okay, it's cool. I'm not, because they didn't cross the line. You're upset about something, let's talk about it. And let's have a conversation about it. And I was always willing, and I like doing that, quite frankly. And a lot of people then could understand, hey, yeah, what I can do, what I can't do, what my personal position is, what the position of my party is, and I could explain these things. But I gave anybody that was upset, but respected myself and my staff, I gave them the same respect back. Even if they didn't agree with me, I still respected them. But at the same token, I demanded and expected the respect of anyone else I was representing. And if they didn't want to give it to me, then they're not getting anything from me. So that line helped me a lot in the way I conducted my business.
So Susie, certainly as a Black woman, the tenor of those toxic tweets often have a misogynistic bend to them in a very violent way. So, at which point there's the part where you understand you've fortified yourself, as Frank is saying, protecting staff, you do not cross, but at which point do you then say, not only enough is enough, but then you take it to a level where we've seen in the federal space that there's been some cases of really violent tweets, directed hate mail, death threats, and some of them have gone to court, and the anonymous people have been brought to bear. So at what point does, especially with melanin, right, at what point do you say, okay, we need to call the police, right?
Well, and I mean, I think as Frank said, there are boundaries, right? Like you have to set those. And I always think back, I mean, even with whether it's a tweet, whether it's an email, whether it's anything that comes across in a negative connotation, that sometimes you would think we would get out of character. I'm like, no, I'm Black first. They expect me to do that. So I have to step back and think about it another way. Then I also, like Frank said, protect the people that work with me and that are surrounding me, because they in no way need to be abused as well. But I mean, I always think back to the two main things, like my integrity and my character, because as public figures, and I think Frank is spot on, everyone should, as a public figure, should be thinking about this, and not everybody has the same privilege as those who are in these positions, should be thinking about your character and your integrity and what you're willing to stand for. And when you get to that line and that point that is crossed, there are a number of channels that we have as politicians that we can actually access in order to make sure that whoever that is that's sending out that, misogynistic, that racial, all of those pieces can be addressed through those proper channels that our counterparts would be using in the same way. So, I mean, I'm trying to learn this system as we go, but I know it wasn't designed for us, but there is a designation for those folks that they use all the time. So I try to use that same system in order to get things done the way that they would do the same. It's just different because it's racially charged or it's misogynistic, but sometimes you need to bring it to the forefront to the way that they address it in the same way that we should. I mean, our counterparts who are non-Black. I'm not trying to, because there's a lot of us, but in my party, there's only 4 of us. So 4 out of 55. So, we're the small number. And sometimes we have to utilize that system so that we can feel safe. And we can also have the same, safety protections in place as our other counterparts.
It is, that's so bang on. And I'm also looking at the chat, and the questions are flowing in, and we'll absolutely, please folks, continue to pose them in the chat. And I will pull out a question from the chat just now, Susie, because it was picking up on the safety quotient. Someone asked, and then how do we create a safe environment for our parliamentarians, both in the digital, public figures in both the digital space and the physical space? And I suspect this is part of what the Samara Centre is also looking at as part of their research. So Stephen, Susie, how do we create a safe environment so that more people that look like us can put their names on the ballot?
Yeah, one of the things that I've always commented on is that media always had a role to play. And, with print media not being as prominent today as it was, when I started looking at political issues, I remember going to the mall and reading the 3 main newspapers to get the different perspective on an issue. But with the emergence of more digital forms for media and the clickbaits, some of those media outlets should turn off the commenting on stories and do better fact finding, because a lot of the misinformation and some of the negativity that you would and not finding that safe space comes from sometimes a media story that just wasn't balanced in its writing.
So, I mean, for us, when we say safe spaces, I mean, we're not, even though we are politicians, we're not excluded from, the microaggressions and from the racial connotations that come, and even more so because we are visible, it's a lot harder to dodge those, those jabs, right? And we have to, as public figures, we always try to choose the high road to say, you know what, I'm not going to engage in that. We talked about that earlier. I'm not going to give them space. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in now, and especially with the social media realm, that is a reality for a lot of folks. And what I would say for anyone who wants to be a candidate that, is of brown skin, is of newcomer, is an immigrant, whatever that looks like, step up and step forward because you have a voice, not because you feel like you're going to be attacked. There's a number of people that we've been here and we're going to continue to do that. And I think once we step up a lot more, change will happen. I mean, it's a slow process right now, but change will happen by us speaking up about it, by us reminding them. And this means even legislation, this means, media, this means all of these pieces that take our snips, takes our voices, reminding them that this is real. We will not stand for it, and it is unacceptable. It's not acceptable for our counterparts. It's not acceptable for us. So, I mean, I think it's just being confident and being supported enough to be able to stand and be in a candidacy and be in a space in which we sit in as well.
I'd like to add to that if I can. I completely agree, Susie. Is anybody that's thinking of running, I 100% encourage you. And I want to touch on something that Erin brought up in her opening remarks. And I couldn't agree more when she said it's a system, at least the one I knew, designed by white men for white men. And I know that is so true, at least in the arena that I know, which was the federal politics, the behavior. There's no place for a woman to be a woman. There's a place, they say that, but there's a place for a woman that's ready to be aggressive and macho and angry like a man. And I'm not saying all men are like that, because I'm not like that, and I disagreed with it. And my personal upbringing, my mother, who was a Barbadian, and where decorum was primordial to her and proper behavior, I just couldn't engage at all. So the system fundamentally has to change, and the only way it's going to change is more of us step up and say, no, I'm not accepting this way. I am coming, and I'm not changing myself to fit in. I'm coming to change the system, and the system needs to change because it is a rigid system, at least the one I knew. And the way to perform and to get on the medias and to do that is to be aggressive, to be disagreeable, to say rude things, all kinds of stuff I completely disagreed with. And when I can tell you, when I was in Ottawa, I made a real effort to try and change the system. I wasn't successful. And one of the first groups I went to was they have a women's caucus. And I knew the women's caucus said, look, this is horrible, this behavior. And that's true also for many other cultures, not just the Caribbean culture that I know, but many other cultures go, I don't fit into this world like that. So I really would like to underline what Susie said. Don't let that be a discouragement. Take your space and go in there and try and change the system. Lord knows we need it.
Thank you so much, Frank, Stephen, and Susie. It is not acceptable for us, and it's definitely not acceptable for our counterparts. So why would we be there? You have to come to change the system. There's the legislative policy, as Stephen touched on, media and how the portrayal looks like. And in fact, at the very top, Susie, you described how you were like the itty bitty in the article, whatever that looks like. And this has been a great conversation. I do want to again encourage those watching, please put your questions in the chat, and I'm going to ask the panelists. I suspect I know what the answer is. If you had to do it all over again with the information that you have and and the teams that you have and didn't have, would you run for public office?
Well, I don't mind starting that off. Having the information that I have now, and my understanding of the processes locally, it wouldn't change my view on running, because I got spurred on by an issue I think that a more diverse voice needed to be heard on, because we don't come as a part of the privileged class, where we have the generational wealth, handing over properties to our children. I'm still an immigrant to this country. My children formed the first generation of Canadians. And of course, now with this new grandson, we're now hitting the second generation for my family. And I want to make sure that there is space created for them. And I've said it to some of my colleagues on council when I highlight some of the real activists that I was vicariously mentored by, the Rocky Jones, the Wade Kojo Williams. And I mentioned these guys and how aggressive they had to be. And I've always commented that they kicked the doors off the hinges, and there were a number of these individuals. They kicked the doors off the hinges. They allowed me to sit at the table as a result. So the role I then play is to ensure that the next generation benefits from being a voice of a much broader community. So, yeah, you know, if knowing all I know, yeah, I probably would have run a little sooner.
Susie.
I want to say that there's always a time and a place for things, and I had an amazing job before this. And not that money was an issue, but it was just like I did community work, I worked with people, I engaged, and that's what I do. And so I transfer all of those skills into what I do now, which, you know, in turn has put me in a position where I can help a whole lot more people, which, you know, it seems like it's, oh, you add more work to yourself, but I would definitely run again. And it's not more work when you're helping, when you're doing the work for people. It's not as stressful and as strenuous as it is. I mean, to be honest with you, the strenuous part is sitting in the legislature. That's the most mind-boggling, but that's a different thing. I would definitely run again because my entire life, I felt like I was mentoring folks. And if I can be a leader or someone that someone is inspired to be like, then I would want to be that person so that they could step up and one day want to be in this position or other spots that are available. So yes, I would definitely do it again. And I enjoyed my run that I did when I started.
Frank, you want to take another kick at the can?
Sure.
In a Pierrefonds-Dollard?
So I would say it's an honor to serve your country, to serve your community, whether it's, again, like I said, whether it's at the city level, the provincial level, or the federal level. I felt a great honor to be elected and to be a representative for Pierrefonds-Dollard at the federal government. I think it's a great honor. So absolutely, I did it once. I had a safe riding. I chose not to run again because I felt the system was broken and I could not change it. I plan to go back if I'm successful in going back, but only to fix it. I'm not going back to do the same old, okay? And I see like a lot of questions and things in the chat, and I'll tell people about tokenism, questions along those lines, and not allowing ourselves to be tokens. My mother, it's not that well known, but my mother, Gloria Baylis, fought and won the first case of racial discrimination in Canada. Okay, and she was a young Black woman, but she didn't say you have to give me the job because I'm young. She didn't say you have to give me the job because I'm a woman. She didn't say you have to give me the job because I'm Black. She said you cannot deny me the opportunity. You cannot deny me the opportunity. And so many people listening or out there think, do I have the right? Do I even have the right to have this opportunity? You have that right. You have that right to run, and you should not run to be a token. You should run to be whoever you are. I ran to be Frank Baylis with my background, my heritage, whatever I brought to the table, however I was brought up, whatever foods I like, whatever my views were. I didn't run, but there is a lot of tokenism. Unfortunately, I saw a lot of tokenism in the federal politics. I completely disagree with it because I don't believe in barriers. And if there's a barrier and they say, look, we take some person like a woman that's on this side, we put you on this side. Okay, there's a woman there. Are you happy? No, I'm not happy. Take the barrier down. That's the job. We have to take the barrier down, not throw a few people over and then say, look, there's a colored person there, or there's a Jewish person there, or a woman there. So we've taken care of it. So I'm completely against tokenism. And unfortunately, I did see a fair amount of it in my world.
You know, to that point, Frank, I have to say one of the reasons that I love the municipal level of government is that it is the closest level of government to the people. You know, I get to completely ignore that party politics, and you get to truly be yourself and work in an aggressive way that there's no leader there that's saying that, no, we're going to whip the votes. And I've actually reminded a lot of councillors on votes and issues. I said, this is not party politics. There are no votes to be whipped here. So you got to remember, you're voting the conscience of the community.
Well, I just want to say to that point as well, I'm with a small group. So I know we're small right now. We will be larger later, but I've always stepped into this position with the intention of being who I am. I know who I am. I don't need to change for no one. And at first, you're starting to feel things out, figuring out where you go, like what this looks like, what this world looks like. And then, then you realize, I'm supposed to be here. And you have to remember that when you're sitting in a seat that typically is not taken up by folks like us. And we're there for a reason. And like, Stephen, you said it, it's like you represent a community, you represent a riding. Like those are the people that you're there to speak for. No party line. And when I sit there, that's exactly how I think. Even though I am with the party and I do respect my party and they know that, I always have to remember that I represent 17,000 people. And those 17,000 people are the folks that matter the most. And if I can't speak for them, then why am I sitting here? So, and I always have to remind myself of that. So you're right. It's sometimes it's a little bit challenging, but you can't change who you are when you're sitting in the seat.
Wow, thank you. So we have a bunch of questions coming in through the Q&A, and just very quickly before we start to field questions from the audience. And again, thank you to everyone who has joined this great webinar collaboration between Operation Black Vote and the Samara Centre for Democracy. So let's see if we can do this. We've got 3 panelists, 3 questions, rapid fire. What 3 things would you advise someone who is seeking political office? Let's see if we can do this. 30 seconds for 3 of you. 3 things, 30 seconds. Let me see. Stephen is smiling. So Stephen, you go. 30 seconds, 3 things.
I'm always smiling. One of the first things I would say to somebody who wants to run for office, have a reason why you want to be there. Just don't do it because of notoriety. Have a real reason to understand the process itself and make sure you're going in there with an understanding of the process to get and achieve something while you're there, and ensure that you're already working within your community at large.
Excellent.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'll go next, and just to add on to what Stephen said, and as well, know yourself and know your capabilities. Like being in a role like this is not, for the faint-hearted. It's a lot of work, but it's good in the sense that you're helping folks and you're making impacts. Secondly, know that you have a network of people around you, so you're not doing this by yourself. There's support people in place, whether it's through your party, whether it's through your office, whether it's through your community, that will help see you continue to be successful. Oh, and another thing is believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. Like you are going to be the person that is the face of your office. So believe in yourself.
I would say 3 things too is, first of all, do it if it calls to you. And that's something that only you by yourself know deep inside of you if it's a calling that you have. If it is, do it. That's number 1. Number 2, when you go into it, be true, know what your core beliefs are. What you know who you are, your core beliefs, your core background, and don't be willing to change on that. Number 3, in all politics, you must compromise. In life, you must compromise. In jobs, you must compromise. If you say, I'm only going to go to the movies I like, the restaurants I like, all this, you have no friends. So you compromise, and you have to compromise in politics too. But when you compromise, don't compromise on those core issues. And you'll know what they are, and you'll know how it feels when you're pushed to compromise on those core issues. Don't compromise there.
Thank you. Thank you. 3 words, 3 pieces of advice from 3 candidates, people elected, and in 30 seconds. This is fantastic. So we will now move to the chat, and if folks will allow me as individuals start to put more questions into the Q&A. If I were to give 3 pieces of advice in 30 seconds, I ran for political office, and I will reiterate some of the things that I heard. I'm not running to be a token, so don't run to be a token. I am supposed to be here and find a network, and you will be surprised where your network actually comes from. It is your community, and trust and believe in that. Believe in yourself. All right. Let's see. Questions in the chat. I know the panelists can see the chat questions. Let me see. Specifically, oh, this is one. Specifically in Nova Scotia, we have a white man as our Minister of Afro-Nova Scotia Affairs to mitigate the predicted. Can you see that one clearly, Susie? That is directed to, let me read it out. Specifically in Nova Scotia, we have a white man as our Minister of African Nova Scotia Affairs. To mitigate the predicted backlash, the solution was to give the associate position to a Black man from the community of Preston, because you're reading that, you can see that question. Okay. To mitigate that, the position was given to a Black man from the community of Preston, because that association, I know firsthand, has some people that aren't satisfied. And it's a longer question than that, but I think maybe what the person is getting at is the tokenism part of it. So what is?
I hate video because then you could see people's faces when they're talking. It's just ugh. So that is absolutely true. I couldn't see the question, but what you're saying is people felt like adding a Black person as an ADM, assistant deputy minister or associate deputy minister, was to appease the African Nova Scotians who were in an uproar about having a white male, an older white male, in a position as a Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs. So our landscape in Nova Scotia is that the government that is sitting right now, they are all white. There is no diverse nature in any of the members other than the fact that they may be women and men. So I too noticed that will seem as though it is tokenism, because the community had to have an uproar. There had to be a huge discussion. There had to be, community cry out to the minister to make this change, and he was not budging. The premier was not budging. The premier was not budging. When I asked in legislature, he finally appeased folks and added in an associate deputy minister. And with all due respect, the associate deputy minister is a great person, lovely guy. But when you're an associate, you don't make decisions. Like you give suggestions and you advise, but you don't actually decide. So, for me, it just didn't seem very substantial to just add in an African Nova Scotian just because.
So one thing is acceptable and another thing is not acceptable. And as you were talking, Susie, there was a great audience question that came up, and I think this applies when, we've sort of talked about how each of you got into considering putting your name on the ballot, the journey, the experience, the negative, the positive. And this is almost taking us back to our very first question, the foundational quotients. What are the first steps to get into politics?
I can take
I'll take a step. Oh, go ahead, Frank.
No, go ahead. Steve.
I would say one of the first step is knowing the community that you're in and clearly understanding the community's challenge. Again, finding that inside purpose. You know, do you want to take that battle on, and what can you bring to the table to solve that problem? Would have to be one of the very first steps. Next, you go build a network and build it out from there.
Yeah, I would add to that is determine and think what level appeals to you. Then all three levels are valid. All three levels deal with different issues. I would have sometimes people come to me and say, Frank, we got to get a stop sign here. Can you bring it up to Trudeau? And I'm trying to think, you know, how do I tell this guy? It's not the federal level that looks after stop signs, but I'm joking there. But stop signs are important, but they're not the level of the federal government and that. So to understand the different levels and see which one speaks to you, that's the first thing. Then the second thing is, once you say, okay, I know what level I want to run at, then you need to decide where's there's a riding, an opening, an opportunity. Because some ridings, unfortunately, the person's been in there for too long. I've seen that at all levels, and they're not leaving. And so there's no opportunity for new blood or new ideas. So it does go into the calculation about deciding what level and then where. On the same token, as I said that, I've also seen where someone's been in there for so long, they take the seat for granted, and some young person with a lot of energy comes in and says, look, I'm going to work the ground and win. And I've seen that too. So if you decide that you want to run at what level and you decide what area you want to run in, those step 1 and 2, step 3, and you cannot get away from this step here, you have to get out, knock on doors, meet your constituents, whatever level you're running at. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of investment. And if you think you can do it by just putting a pamphlet out or do it on social media or whatever, it will not work, in my estimation. You have to put a lot of legwork, footwork, knocking on people's doors. And I'll tell you, it has a huge impact. So that would be the first steps. What level, what riding, what area geographically, and then start putting the work in.
Mhm. And after all of those steps, you need to be able to step up and put your name forward on whatever level of government that looks like. So, you know, when you put your name forward, there's obviously like a vetting in or a nomination or some sort of, you know, process that happens, because sometimes there's more than just one person in your area that wants to run for that seat. So, you know, you have to look at those options as well. Like you said, knowing your community, you know, knowing the process, what level of government you're willing to, you know, to learn about and educate yourself on, so that you can see which level that is, that you're willing to be able to step up to. So, you know, and then putting your name on the ballot and getting ready to do some serious work after an election is called. That is essentially the starting point.
Okay, so I think there's maybe one thing that we have not discussed. We've talked around what it looks like to ultimately get to the decision to put your name on the ballot, the team surrounding. How much money does it cost? What kind of financial, what is the toll on your personal pocketbook, the fundraising aspect? And I would ask that, and again, to the audience, please know that the three panelists are happy to have these conversations in following formats. But you know, Frank, federal, how much did it cost? Susie, provincially, Stephen, municipally. Let's talk numbers if you can share, but just in terms of that particular.
So at the federal level, and this is something that goes back to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, he put in restrictions of how much you can give, how much I can give to myself, or someone can give to me. And that was really important, because before Jean Chrétien, very rich people would say, I'm writing you a check for $100,000. Well, guess who you're in hock to, or who you deal with. So Jean Chrétien put in these limitations. So it doesn't matter how wealthy or whatever, You can only give so much to yourself. So you can only spend so much. You have at federal level, you have to raise the rest of the money. Having said that, what you need to give up, and I talked about already, is a lot of your time. And your time could be your income. So you're giving in a different way, or you're giving up family time, but you're giving a lot. But it's not just necessarily financially that you're giving up. You're giving up your time, your earning opportunities, which in a way is your money, and also your family and leisure time. That's what you have to give.
So on a provincial level, I was very fortunate to be a part of a riding that the previous MLA before me was a really great fundraiser. So the party had already had a large, substantial amount of money that was already there for the election. Unlike some of my other colleagues who had to fundraise as they were campaigning, I didn't have to do that. My campaign cost almost $50,000. And so it was already raised, plus on top of whatever else people wanted to give. It just went into the bank for me for my next election, if that's the case. But there will be funding in that based on the fact that this particular riding is very supportive of our party. So it has always been there. But you're right, Frank, it is a lot of your time and income. And at the time I had a job. And so, I mean, I have a family, I have 7 children. So I can't just say, oh, I can go without a paycheck for a whole month or more, depending on when we start, to just knock on doors for 12 hours a day, right? So I was fortunate to be able to have my job previous was able to kind of offset some of that, so that I could continue doing the work that I do, but still be a candidate as well. So.
Stephen.
You know, the municipal level is quite different, and almost like a blended system between the rules that were brought in federally. So in Ontario, we do have restrictions around how much you can spend on a campaign associated with the number of voters in the ward or riding or poll that you're running in. Because I ran for mayor in the last election, I got to use the number that was citywide. I'm a bit fortunate than most that probably run, because I do have some residual income that kind of covers the expenses, so I could run a much longer campaign, which you can in Ontario, because you can run a campaign starting in May, right to election date of October, unlike federal or provincial campaigns. So, you know, we were able to raise some significant amount of money for my campaign. I think the totality of what we spent was a little under $63,000 for a municipal campaign.
Time, talent, treasure, and community. You need the time. I should say passion, time, passion, treasure, and community. I just want to thank you so much, Susie Hanson, the MLA from Halifax, Needham, Stephen Wright, Peterborough City Council, and Frank Baylis, the former federal member of parliament for Pierrefonds-Dollard. And I know that there are so many other questions in the chat that we did not quite get to, but once again, encouraging folks as part of the post event that the Samara Centre for Democracy and Operation Black Vote will reach out to you with a way to connect. And on that note, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome and introduce Velma Morgan, who is the chair of Operation Black Vote Canada. She is the architect of the first ever Black Community Provincial Leaders Debate, Black Women's Political Summit, and Next Generation Political Summit. She also co-created the 1834 Fellowship. Velma is currently working with Dr. Erin Tolley and Carleton University on a study of Black Canadians experiences on politics. Welcome, Velma, over to you.
Thank you very much. As chair of Operation Black Vote Canada, I think this is a great way to end Black History Month of 2023. So good evening, everybody. Operation Black Vote is dedicated to developing, promoting, and supporting the participation and election of Black Canadians at all levels of our political system, including appointments to government agencies, boards, and commissions. In short, we endeavor to see more Black Canadians elected, appointed, and connected to government. In order for Canada's promise and potential to be fully realized, every community must have the access and the opportunity to shape our nation today and build the Canada we wish to inherit tomorrow. I would like to thank our incredible speakers tonight, Frank, Susie, and Stephen. I know when we reach out to them, they did not hesitate to give us a yes, we will participate. I would like to thank our partner, Samara Centre, for partnering with us. It was a labor of love in terms of our goals kind of meet with each other. And Erin Tolley for partnering with us on the research that's going to be very, very valuable, not only to us, but to our community in seeing more Black Canadians elected to political office and tracking that. Lastly, I would like to tell everybody about a toolkit that we are creating. It is it's called Seat at the Table. It is for Black women who are running municipally or thinking of running municipally. And this came out of our Seat at the Table sessions that we had last year, where we had 12 participants, 7 who ran and 5 who won their election. So we're trying to put that information, make it more accessible for all Black women who are thinking of running. So I'd like to thank you for being with us here tonight. You can reach out to Operation Black Vote at obvc.ca or on all our social media at Black Vote Canada. Thank you very much.